Welcome to the C# tutorial. In this tutorial, I'll be introducing you to variables. Right, so what are variables? Variables in programming and also in C# are a container that we use to store values or to store information. The best way that I like to view it is it's a box, and in that box we can store things that we like. In this case, values. We can store whatever we like. We can store numbers, we can store strings, booleans, and we can store a whole lot of things. So I give an example of storing 10 to x, and we also gave this box a name and we called it x, and we are storing 10 inside of it. So in this container, we are actually storing 10 inside of it. I'm sure you're not new to variables. If you have been doing math, maybe since primary or since high school, you might have been using variables in mathematics. So in this case, we are also going to be using variables a lot in programming, especially in C# programming and other programming languages. So we'll be using variables a lot. Now that we know that variables are containers or are boxes, what are the uses of variables in programming? Variables can be used to store values, as we've discussed, and they can be used to manipulate values. Let's say you have variable x plus variable y. You can add those two and get x plus y. So we can use variables. We can actually manipulate variables. And we can reuse values, or we can reuse the variable itself. So given that we have x in our example, we can use x in multiple lines of our code. And finally, we can change values as needed. There are other reasons why variables are important and why we use variables, but these are actually the main ones why we use variables. So we use them to store values, we use them to manipulate values, we use them so we can be able to reuse values and to change values as needed. You may want x to be 10 now, but in the future you might want x to be maybe 15 or 20. So variables allow us to do that without actually going through all of the code as we might if it was only just a number. Right, now let's get a bit formal with the definition and how we can declare variables. To understand what variables are doing behind the scenes as we declare variables in programming, we have to understand what happens to computer memory. So let's say this box, this very primitive box with like boxes inside, is our computer memory, is actually your computer memory. So what happens is when we declare something, let's say in this case int x equal 10. So what is actually happening is we are telling the computer to go and look for a space in memory, in computer memory, to store our value 10 and name it x. So what the program or what the computer is going to be doing is going to check this computer memory, and if it finds a space, let's say this space from here to here, and if it finds that this space can be able to accommodate this variable, this x variable, it now stores this 10 value in memory. Here's what's very important in what is happening here. So what is happening here is it's very important to declare a type in C# whenever you want to use variables. So it's important to declare a type. In this case, it's an int type. More on this when we talk about data types in the next video. So it's important to declare the type, and it's important to give your variable a name and also to assign it. So this is the type, this is the name, and this is the value. This tells the program that go and look for a space in memory that will be able to accommodate a variable that is of int type and has 10 in value. If you wanted to create another variable, let's call it y. In this case, we would say int y equal 5. In other words, we would say that we are telling the computer that go into the computer memory and look for a space where we can store y that is of integer type that has a value of 5. So we can, go to computer memory, and if the computer finds a space, it might find that, oh, this is suitable to store y and this is to store x. So we can be able to reuse these values as we like throughout the life of the program. So we can be able to use the 10 that belongs to x. We can also be able to use the 5 that belongs to y in this case. So it's important to have the type. It's important to have the name. As I talk about data types in the next video, we'll talk about assigning and declaring. See why sometimes it's important to give 10 or to give a value to a variable, and sometimes it's not necessary. So in this case, let's just say we need a type, we also need a name and a value, so that we know that in computer memory we can have a space that is going to store a certain value that is of certain type. Right, so let's see how that looks like in Visual Studio. So I already have int x equal to 10, and now let's say have int y equal, let's say 5, just as we had on our visualization. Right, so we have int x equal 10, and we also have int y equal 5. Don't worry about the int and int. I will create a video that is going to follow this one, where we'll talk about all the data types, what the int is and what strings are and everything. We'll talk about everything in the next video. So now we're just understanding that we have x and y, and let's try to print them. Let's say we're trying to print console dot write line. Say we want to print x, and console dot write line we also want to print y, and console dot write line we wanna print x plus y, and maybe we want to print x minus y. Depends on whatever you want to use. We know that we also have to have console dot read line like that. So we know that here we are supposed to have 10. Here we're also supposed to have 5. Here the answer should be 15. Here it should be 5. So our output, we are expecting it to be 10, 5, 15, 5. So let's try to run it. Right, as we can see, we have 10, 5, 15, 5 printed onto the console as we expected. So this means we have printed our variables and we were able to manipulate our variables. Yeah, so that's it on intro to variables. I hope this introduction was well suited for you. And in the next video, we explore more on data types and we expand more on these variables. Be sure to like and subscribe so that you'll be notified when I post the next video, or if you're watching this video in the future, I'm sure I'll post the video in the description down below, or the video should appear on the screen. Remember to keep education fashionable. See you in the next one.